Hey, I'm Scott L. Miller. This is Sam IT. And on today's show, we're going to talk primarily to businesses, a little bit less to IT, but it's still a good video for IT professionals to watch. We're going to talk about the three main components of web hosting, the things you need to understand. And this is a topic, as someone who consults with businesses and talks about websites and hosting and this kind of stuff all the time, this particular talk is one that I give almost once a day, maybe 3 to 4 times a week. I will have to sit with a company and discuss this exact topic. So if this is something you've never heard before, don't be surprised, because almost no one that I ever talked to has ever had to deal with this previously, even though it's a really big deal and something that every company should know and every IT department should be educating you about. But I made this video so that your IT department can use it to show to you so that they don't have to teach you these things. You can just watch this video. So thanks for joining me.
NTG, supporting business and technology globally since 1999.
So there's things that we need to know for every website, and this applies to your email as well. So the first thing is your registrar. This is the company that you go to actually register to purchase your domain name. So let's say you're starting mywebsite.com. I'm sure someone already owns that. You would have to go to a registrar and buy mydomain.com. The registrar is also the one that's going to tell you if it's available or not and tell you how much it costs. So we need to buy that. The purpose of a registrar is essentially to act like a lawyer or a real estate office. The digital real estate or the web real estate that you're purchasing, your domain, is your identity. But the registrar really only functions as a legal entity like a lawyer to act on your behalf, to manage the purchase, and to hold on to the paperwork. They don't really do anything technical. So this is a component of this overall web hosting system that really should be handled by the owners of a company. And I'll talk about that in another video, exactly who should be touching that and why. But in general, think this is not something for IT to do, just like you wouldn't have your IT guy go down and file the paperwork for the deed on your house, or they wouldn't go get the pink slip on your car, right? You would never have a third party, unless it's your attorney, go and actually hold something of so much value. Also, the filing for the incorporation of your business, right? These are all things that you deal with directly. And your registrar is another piece like that. This is your digital real estate. This is the identity of your company on the internet. Don't put that in anyone else's hands. Hold on to it. The purpose of a registrar, the one technical piece that the registrar does, is they point to your DNS host. We don't need to know what a DNS host is. We only need to know that that is the only thing a registrar does. This is where your IT firm is going to come into the picture. Your IT firm, now this may be you doing all the pieces yourself because you're the owner and you don't have an IT firm, or this may be a web company, then that's the only thing they're doing. Maybe it's your IT department. But one way or another, the first technical component of this ecosystem is the DNS hosting. And that stands for Domain Name System. That is basically the internet white pages that help you find resources based on the identity of the company, right? But it's technical. There's a lot of IT stuff that goes on in your DNS. And the reason that this is separated out, not just for legacy purposes and not just because it works well, but also so that the registrar, so the account, right, the person who actually has the username and password, the person who actually has control of the identity of the company, only needs to know the DNS entries to point to the DNS provider. So the IT person or company, whatever, can simply hand 2 really simple little DNS names for the owner or the attorney to type into the registrar, and they're done. You don't have to have the owner involved anymore. You don't have to have the attorney involved anymore. Now you're able to hand off to IT safely, and IT is able to go do their job, and they don't have to worry about accidentally losing the identity of the company or doing some legal filing that they shouldn't have done, because with DNS, they can only do technical IT things, and the owner of the company knows that when they get into their registrar, the only thing they should be doing is confirming another year of owning the identity or turning it off because they don't want to pay for that ownership anymore, right? That's all they have to worry about. And if there's anything else, IT is going to tell them, well, we had to change DNS providers, so here's the new entries you have to put in. It's a very simple thing. It's very quick. It's very easy, and it doesn't require any IT knowledge whatsoever. You're simply copying and pasting 2 lines of text into a really simple web interface. That's it, right? So these first 2 components, very important. Now, if you have to, at this point, as an owner, you can just ignore everything and let IT take it all. But we're going to go a step farther and kind of explain where these pieces come in. So the third piece is going to be your web hosting. If we're talking about websites, if we were talking about your email, then it would be email hosting, but same difference. These can be separate companies. They can be one company. Probably want them to be separate, but again, different conversation. Your IT team controlling your DNS control where your domain points to, right? So if we have mycompany.com and you want to have web hosting at webhost A, it is your DNS that tells people who are looking for your website to go to webhost A to find it. And if you have email hosted by email host B, it is your DNS that tells them where to find it. If you need to do some security things for your SSL certificates, it is your DNS that handles that. If you need to have web security, if you need to have, there's a lot of things that happen in DNS. It gets relatively complicated and technical, and that's fine because it's your IT people who are running that. So that allows you to separate out the pieces into 3 separate things. You have the registrar, which handles the business side of things that needs only be handled by an owner or a CEO or an attorney. And you have the DNS, which should be being overseen by whoever oversees your IT or that department. It doesn't have to be the head of IT handling DNS. It could be anyone in the department as appropriate. And then that points to the hosting providers or other services that are being provided. In most cases, you're not going to have your own IT department running a web host or running an email host. You might be using someone like Bluehost or a Small Orange or Hostadillo to do your website hosting. You might be using someone like Office 365 or Google Suite or Zoho to handle your email hosting, and any number of other services you may purchase or run yourself or any mixture thereof. It is by controlling DNS that you're able to connect to those other services, and IT is the ones that oversee the DNS. They may oversee the web hosting, they may oversee the email hosting, they may oversee other things that we haven't thought of. That's fine, but they may not as well. So we know that IT is going to be, or your IT is going to be in control of the DNS, and that allows them to handle the appropriate internal management of whatever other services are going to happen. Now, let's go a little bit deeper. So these are the 3 main pieces, right? Registrar, DNS, and the host. Those are the 3, and they should always be separate companies. There are times that we could theoretically merge some of them together, but realistically, let's keep them separate. The registrar should never be combined with anything for a lot of reasons. One, there's market pressure, right? And we talk about that a lot on this channel. If you're new because this is a business discussion and you've been brought in for that reason, be aware. We talk about this a lot. Market pressures do a lot of things that may, technically, there may be a time that a registrar could do a good job with your DNS, but market pressure says there's absolutely no reason for them to do so, and anyone who is a registrar that invests a lot of money into doing a good job with DNS is going to lose money, and that's not wise. You don't want a registrar who's not wise. You want one who's good at being a registrar. So pick one based on their quality of registrar and ignore other services that they offer. All other services that they offer. I don't care how interesting it sounds, how good their marketing is, how big their name is, they are not valuable to you as a company or as an IT department beyond being a registrar. They cannot be. Market pressure says they will only be good at doing that one thing. All other services that they most likely offer make their most money by being overpriced and low quality because people who are using their registrar for other services are 99% of the time doing so out of either laziness or not understanding how the products work. They don't understand the technical components, and so they see an easy way out, or what is perceived as an easy way out, and taking that, the path of least resistance. And so you'll generally find really slow, low quality hosting at exorbitant prices because they know you didn't shop around. That's their captive audience. Just like how an ISP will always overcharge you for phone services dramatically, not 5%, more like 500%, because they know if you went to your ISP, you didn't shop around for phones. Your registrar knows if you go to them for web hosting, you didn't look at any industry options. You have no idea what industry baseline looks like. You're not a discerning customer, and it would be crazy for them as a business to do anything else, because those captive audiences who are taking that path of least resistance represent a lot of revenue that they would lose if they decided to do a good job. So they will never do a good job because they would have to pay you to do a good job. That's not going to happen. It makes no sense. So we always keep the registrar to that one function. DNS technically could be merged with your web hosting if for some reason the group that you want in charge of your DNS, which would be your internal IT, is also going to do your web hosting. It is pretty rare that you want your internal IT to do web hosting. It's not a bad thing if you do, but it's not common. It is normally a one-off function. Internal IT departments don't typically have the skills or the time to do good web hosting, right? It's something that falls outside of their daily activities, and so doing so will often be a waste of their resources, where they have things that are really valuable to your company that they need to be doing. Web hosting is not an expensive function. You might get really good web hosting for somewhere in the $5 to $10 range, right? You can get pretty basic web hosting for $5. That's good enough for a lot of companies. You can get really high-end premium web hosting for $10. Your internal department probably can't spend only $10 per month spread out over a number of years in their own time and resources to build you a web host. It's not practical. But if you have a specialty case where you need to do it, that's okay. But in general, your DNS is going to be controlled by your IT department, and then your web hosting can be controlled by a web hosting vendor, your email by an email hosting vendor, and so forth. And so that's how we end up with our three pieces of separation. It is important to note your IT department needs to be in charge of your DNS. I cannot believe how often I see this as a mistake, where someone goes to the web host and just has them randomly do the DNS management. And then when IT needs to make critical changes for some other service like email, they end up maybe not getting access to what they need. Changes may take days instead of minutes. Security may be compromised. And if there's anything happens with the web host, you may end up in a not disaster scenario, but a problematic scenario where you're spending a lot of time trying to get access to something you should have had access to control all along. So make sure your IT always oversees DNS. That is a trivial function and something that every IT department should be doing for every company everywhere, and does not require any expertise. They are the correct department to be overseeing that function. The last person that you want doing those things is your web designer. This is a separate conversation to really understand how the different pieces of the website itself work within the picture, and we will cover that next time. But just be aware that your designer is in no way the head of your IT department. Unless, of course, your IT department has a web designer who actually heads it. That would be a little bit different. But if you go out and hire a web designer, an artist, a graphic designer to put together a website for you, they should not be the people acting as your IT department, controlling your DNS that controls hosting of any service, let alone the hosting of things that are not your website, right? These are completely the wrong people to be involved in these decisions. It's not that you shouldn't have a web designer. You shouldn't be having a designer doing business infrastructure management and oversight and governance components, right? It just isn't sensible. But these are the mistakes we see every day. We see these things being combined. We see haphazard using of not really selected components, but simply someone knew to find a registrar and the rest just sort of happened, right? Avoid the "it just happened." Make sure that you are selecting a registrar that makes sense. Make sure that you are selecting a DNS provider that makes sense. And it's worth noting, the best DNS providers are often free. So it's important just to select a really good one. And there are some that, in most cases today, when I'm making this video, you'd be hard pressed to find any reason not to use Cloudflare as your DNS provider. You may have a specialty case, but in general, Cloudflare is free and easily the best on the market. So this is not about money. This is not about spending more. This is actually about spending less, just spending better, right? And then your web host should be just a web host. And each of these pieces protects you. If your web host doesn't do a good job because you control your DNS, you're able to move to another web host in minutes. You have protection because your IT department, who is your direct representative against your vendors, is able to protect you from the hosting vendors. And if your IT department were to go crazy or just disappear, get hit by a bus or whatever, your registrar, the ownership of the site, is how you protect against losing access or having a rogue IT department. So you have two layers of protection. IT protects you against the world, and your legal component, the ownership of the registrar access, protects you against IT. So even your IT manager, if you do these things correctly, can never actually do dramatic damage to your organization. They can only inconvenience you. Those are the reasons that we ask that this be taken very seriously. And no IT should want to hold the registrar information because it's a danger. It's a legal holding that we have no reason, there's no benefit to IT having access to that. We don't want that, or shouldn't, right? Now, a lot of places, a lot of companies end up with IT doing those things simply because someone asked them to, or someone just assumes that that's a technical piece, or it just isn't something they wanted to think about, and so they push it off on IT. But you wouldn't do that with the incorporation of your business. It isn't something you would do with the deed for your house. Don't do it with the identity of your company. Treat it with the respect that it needs, and with these simple steps and almost no money, definitely less money than you would have spent if you didn't think about this carefully, you can have a safer, better protected, better performing business. Thanks for joining me.